Thanks, George. And I want to welcome all of you to the NYSAIS-Now eSeminar on Trustee 101. As George mentioned, I'm also a trustee. I'm on currently on a couple of boards. I'm on here in New York City. I live in New York City, by the way, so you're going to hear maybe sirens and you'll hear New York City sounds in the background. Welcome to New York City. I'm currently a board member on a foundation board that supports a school in Costa Rica. I'm the chair of that board. I'm on the Parents League board here in New York City. I'm the treasurer of that board. And I'm on the ERB, the Educational Records Bureau board as a trustee. So I really like governance. And I want to thank you all for being trustees. I think you're all trustees. If you're not, you're wanting to learn about being a trustee, so that's great. We're going to do a couple things before we get started. And George mentioned that these sessions are e-seminars, and I really do like to treat them as a classroom. So that means that everybody does participate in the conversation. So there'll be lots of times when I'll just stop the presentation and we're just going to talk about it. I think we get more out of these as we chat with each other. And I try to make these a meaningful class. NYSAIS has been working for the last several years in understanding this pedagogy. How do we use online as a way of communicating and discussing topics and issues? So you'll see us working this through a little bit ourselves. Well, hi, Maureen. So let's first of all go around the room, if you will, real quickly. And I want you to just introduce yourself to everybody else in the class, your name and the school that you're at, and maybe how long you've been a trustee. So those three things. So Buxton, let's start with you at Friends Seminary, and we'll work our way around. I don't know that everybody sees the room the way I see it, so we'll go around the room. So Buxton, let's start with you.
Sure. My name is Buxton Majette. I am a new trustee at Friends Seminary.
Great. And Nancy Wolf, just unmute your microphone, lower left-hand side.
I've been a trustee at Robert C. Parker. This is my 6th year, and I'm the former head of Darrow School for 12 years.
Great. Crystal.
Hi, I'm a new trustee at St. Anne's School. I've been on the board for the last 9 months.
Great. Amy Ann, you have to unmute your microphone. There you go.
I'm Amy Ann Kibler. I'm the executive director of the Montessori School of Mahoning Valley, and I'm not a trustee. I'm an executive director.
Great. We're glad you're with us. Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Vogel, and I'm a new trustee of Browning.
Super. Judy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Judy Sheridan. I'm the Associate Director for Accreditation and Evaluation at NYSAIS, and I've been on 2 boards.
Anthony, do you go by Anthony or Tony?
Tony.
Okay,
and,
Tony.
My name is Tony Charvastra. I'm also a new trustee at the St. Anne's School.
Super. And I see Sally Kent. I'm not seeing your image, but I think you're
on. Okay, sorry. I'm Sally Kent. I am a consultant. I'm not with the school right now. I've been on boards and executive boards in Massachusetts, but not here in New York. So, and now I live in New York. So very interested.
Okay, great. And Maureen.
Hi, I'm a former head of school and have been involved with NYSAIS for a while. I'm also on the board of FAS, so French American Schools in New York. So I'm on the governance committee and need a little refresher.
Okay. And Andrew Cook, are you with us? I think he's just recording, George.
Yep, Andrew's recording right now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to put up on, I will use some PowerPoints. So I'll share my screen with you. You'll be able to see this, and then I will go back and forth between sharing screen and just group conversation. So I'm going to put this up right now. Let me share this. Can you hear these sirens behind me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to just start with this quote from Peter Drucker, and I'd like you to all spend just a moment just reading it, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts about what this means to you as a new trustee or a trustee period. So Peter did a lot of work in the for-profit world, but he also did quite a bit of work in the not-for-profit world, which not everybody knows. But this is, I think, important. What does this mean to you as trustees?
Well, I think that that idea of stewardship really, comes to mind, and that there's a sense that you're trying to have the long-term vision and to be mindful of the mission of the institution. And
Okay, so the long-term vision. What else?
I think Buxton here really just supporting the staff and helping them to achieve their, the work that is, before them to be the success of the institution.
Okay. What else? Other thoughts?
It's also a really good way to prioritize. There's so many conflicting, opinions and priorities, and just to have it clearly outlined, how do we make decisions as trustees? It's really helpful to see the mission in there as well as the support of staff in there.
Okay. And keeping in mind that as a trustee, your responsibility is always to the institution. That you are the group that sets the long-term trend, the long-term vision for the institution. You are the only group that really takes that perspective formally. That is your formal responsibility as board members. So I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about several major things. I have some major goals for us. One is I just want to quickly talk about the role of NYSAIS and about NYSAIS and how we support our member schools. Most of you are member schools, a couple of you are not, but we'll talk about that. We will talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of trustees. We will talk about taking the strategic view, and then what resources are available for you as trustees. So let's turn to the idea of NYSAIS. NYSAIS was accredited. We are an accrediting body. Let me just share my screen again with you real quickly. So we do basically four things. We accredit schools, we provide professional development, we provide advocacy work for our schools, and we do legislative work in Albany. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part, but I think it's important to understand the role that an association such as NYSAIS does for our schools. There's 195 member schools and organizations. It's about 82,000 students in NYSAIS schools. So really taking the strategic view starts with you as the Board of Trustees. And the good news about all this is we know that, first of all, successful governance does not happen by accident. It happens on purpose. And the good news is that we do know the practices that work well. We know why schools run well, why schools maybe don't run as well. What we do know is that when a board is running well and the administration are running well, that the school's probably in great shape. When the board is not running as well, or the administration is not running well, or they're not working well together, then there's probably going to be issues. I'll just turn your attention to these four books that we'll use a little bit tonight. One is the Trustee Handbook in the upper right-hand side. That's put out by NEIS. Highly recommended. How many of you have that book already? Well, if you don't, you should. And either ask the school to get it for you. You can buy it directly from NEIS. I highly recommend that book. The other one is the one on the left side, which is the Governance as Leadership. That's put out by Dick Chait. He's one of the authors of this book. Again, we'll use some of this in our workshop today. And then the Nonprofit Answer book put out by Board Source is an excellent book. And then I personally like the 5 Life Stages of Nonprofit Organizations. Really nice way to understand the life stages of an independent school or of any nonprofit organization. So let's start with NYSAIS, and let's start with our definition of a board. And so I'm going to let you look at this. And then again, I'd like you to come back and just tell me what do you think are the key elements of this definition of the way we define a board of trustees. What are the key pieces in this? Just go ahead and read it, and we'll take it off for a moment, and then we'll talk about it. Everybody has a chance to read it now? Okay, let's come back together. So what are some of the key elements in that definition that you think are important?
I think delegating the educational and operational elements to the head of school is an important distinction and an important guidepost in terms of what the role of the trustees are and are not.
Absolutely. Great. Excellent. What else?
I think the word deliberative and just the fact of being deliberate in what we do gives the whole group some focus.
Yeah, the definition that we use is a deliberative body and a deliberative group. And that's really critical, that the idea is that you will come together as a group and you will deliberate. You will spend time thinking about the strategic interests of the school. Okay, very important. What else? The delegation, the deliberation, what else?
Again, the mention of the mission.
The mention of the mission, the fidelity to the mission of the school. Okay, what else? Lastly, let's do the last piece. Sorry.
Fiduciary responsibility.
Say that again, Nancy.
Fiduciary responsibility to make sure.
Fiduciary, absolutely. So if you have nothing, if you do nothing else as a board of trustees, you have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure the school is fiscally sound. So the delegation is critical, the deliberation is critical, the fiduciary is critical, and the fidelity to the mission. Those we'd say are the most critical elements. So NYSAIS is going to give you some guidance in this area. And let's talk real quickly about how NYSAIS defines, if I can get this to work, I'm hoping this does. Let me stop my share for just a second, if you don't mind. Okay, let's go to here, perhaps. So we basically provide guidance in a couple areas. One is through our manual, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. And one of the things that we say at NYSAIS is that governance is so important that it's really a key component of our evaluation. In NYSAIS, there are basically 5 baseline criteria and 14 strategic criteria for accreditation. And then the last area is we do provide principles of best practice for governance. So I want to turn to a few of them. We're not going to do all of these, but I really do want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of them. So and I put them in red. So the first one, baseline criteria, is that you ensure administrative follow-up. You have an outside annual audit. But the key that we add that's additional, that is not typical or maybe not typical, is we add the corresponding management letter. So why do you think we want to have a management letter in there as opposed to just doing the audit? Why do you think that's important?
Well, I'd imagine so other people can read it, so come to facilitate communication amongst other board members. Okay, that's one. So one of the areas that the management letter provides for you is the management letter provides for you as trustees basically a look at the internal controls of the organization. So you as trustees want to be comfortable that the internal controls are being adequately handled. So this is really important in small schools. It's equally as important in large schools, that somehow the person who's taking in the money is not the same person necessarily who's paying out the money, that you have a good sense that somebody's paid attention to the operation side. And that's what the auditor does to this management letter. The bylaws, we won't spend a lot of time talking about that you're applicable, that you're in compliance. You create a conflict of interest policy. The key here is that number B 3.4 is that you keep full and accurate records, not just of the board meetings, which you always do, but also of your committee meetings. So first of all, they're a legal document, right? So we all know that we need to have minutes from our meetings. But why else, as trustees, if we're thinking about this, why else is it important for you to have some type of accurate records of the meetings, of committee meetings and the board meetings themselves?
Why is that?
Document how decisions are arrived at and what information is brought into those meetings.
Sure, absolutely. Why else?
Liability reasons.
Liability reasons. And take the long view and see if you can think about it from that perspective.
Well, just so that you have the historic.
Say that again, Nancy. You just muted your microphone.
So that you have the historical perspective of how decisions have been made to build the future decision making.
Yeah, so you're trustees at a snapshot in time. There were trustees before you, there will be trustees after you. And so the idea of keeping sort of a very accurate historical record helps people in the future understand the history of the school. And that you ensure confidentiality of conversations. So all conversations the board has in board meetings or in committee meetings should be considered as confidential. Now, why is that one important?
Allows decision-making to be done without concern for other influences that are not relevant to the long-term vision of the school.
Okay. And doesn't it also, if you feel that you can, when you're talking about a complicated subject, that you can really have a good, honest, open conversation and without it being out in the parking lot, so to speak, and taken out of context. So you want to make sure that whatever you talk about can be handled in a confidential way. The board develops trust with each other, and that's a really critical thing as board members. This is our strategic 3.1, which is that your roles and responsibilities need to be clearly defined. They need to be transparent and communicated to all constituents. You communicate your decisions. You recognize and fulfill your responsibilities as stewards of the mission, keeping in mind, as I said earlier, you are the stewards of the mission. You have effective strategic planning. You provide stability and transitions for two groups. One person is the head of school. So that's really important. That's transition time is very critical to the school. And you have stability and transitions for yourselves, for the board leadership, and for the board members. Why is that? I mean, we say that this is important at NYSAIS, and we know from experience that it is important, but why do you think we say that? Why is it important to have stability and transitions?
Because I think
So they don't get entrenched dogmatic leadership, that you get an inflow of new people and new ideas, and you don't end up with a few people that kind of run the school that get kind of entrenched in that position.
Okay, so that'd be one reason for transitions. Why the stability in transitions?
Continuity of mission.
Say that again.
To provide continuity of mission and confidence in the external constituency.
Yeah, so continuity of the mission, and then the confidence that they realize that, okay, this is okay. The transition will be okay. We will get through this. We're going to do it in a nice, organized way. You also need to ensure that the head of school receives appropriate support, evaluation, and compensation. You ensure that financial resources are provided for the school. And you have policies to support this creation and review of an annual operating budget, capital budget, as well as, and NYSAIS really focuses in on this a lot, and you should too as trustees, a multi-year financial plan. That's not just the responsibility of the finance committee, it's the responsibility of all the trustees. I'll go to this one. You're responsible for establishing broad policies, and you delegate responsibility for the operations. We talked about that. You focus on the strategic interests of the school. You should, as board members, you're doing it now, which is really great, participate in a program of board development. So there should be a new trustee orientation, ongoing trustee education, and the board itself should be evaluating itself. We also believe at NYSAIS that the issues of gender, diversity, multiculturalism should be considered in your policymaking and your governing body membership. And that you have, and this is really an important one as trustees, that you have adequate insurances in place. And that is not, again, the responsibility of just the finance committee. That is responsibility of the whole board. So as new board members, you should ask the question, what are the insurances? And you should have an answer that is satisfactory to you. So we're going to talk about basically 3 duties that you have as trustees. One, what we would call the duty of care. One is called the duty of loyalty, and one is the duty of obedience. I really dislike the term duty of obedience, but that is the way Dick Chait and his other partners in writing classified it. So let's just talk about these real quickly. Duty of care is you actively participate in making decisions on behalf of the school, and the key here is that you use your best judgment in doing so. So you're an active participant, you use your best judgment. Duty of loyalty is that you need to set aside your own personal interests, professional interests, always in loyalty. The needs of the organization as trustees should come first. Then the last one is obedience, which is that this is the legal side. You ensure that the school is true to its mission and that it's complying with all laws. And that doesn't mean that you do the investigation, but you should ask, are we sure we're in compliance with the state laws or the local laws or the federal laws? So what are some things that you should know about the school? Well, first of all, you should know the history of the school. You should be able to tell people the history. You should know the history of the board. You should also know, now this is really a critical one, you should know the governance structure and the relationship with the management and the staff. So how do we communicate what's our relationship as board to management? What's our relationship as board to the staff? What are the committees of the school? And how do we communicate back and forth? So for instance, does the head talk strictly to the board chair and then and not to individual board members outside of the board meetings? Does the head speak with the executive committee? But the bottom line is that should be clearly spelled out. Everybody understands how the communication works. Any comments or questions about any of these? So there should be some documents that you should be receiving and you should be reading. First of all, the bylaws. I can't tell you how many times I get questions about, well, should we do this or should we should we do this? The question I always come back with is, what do your bylaws say? So they're not just empty documents, they're the driving legal documents for your school. You should have a copy of those, you should read them. What's the mission statement of the school? Can you tell in a elevator or someplace what is the mission of the school? Can you give everybody the quick summary of what the mission of the school is? If not, you should. I encourage you, and we do this at NYSAIS also, by the way, we always have on every one of our agendas the mission statement for NYSAIS. And I think that's important to just keep that out in front because that helps you when you're making decisions. As new trustees, you should have the budgets. You should look at the current and the past. You should look at the minutes. Again, that should give you a good sense for how the board is operated. You should look at the audit for the last couple of years and the 990s also. Conflict of interest form, if you haven't signed one, you should be signing it and disclosing it. Now, what does it mean to have a conflict of interest? Can anybody help me with that?
It might mean that a family member is hired by the school in some way or has done consulting work or is a vendor for the school, I think. And
okay.
That's somebody you're associated with or you have a business relationship with, and it might be important to reveal that so that when you speak, it's understood and it guards against your own bringing a personal or professional interest into your decision making, I think.
And can you have a conflict of interest? I mean, do you have to leave the board because you have a conflict of interest?
No, you can have it, but it has to be disclosed, I think. I don't know. I've not usually had many.
Sure. So the key here is that there should be full transparency, that everybody should know what your conflict is, and then the board should make a decision whether you need to recuse yourself from this, or you should step out of the room from this, or you don't vote on, depending on what the conflict is, but those should always be fully disclosed. You should also know the short and long-term plan for the school. Some schools might call it their strategic plan, their long-range vision. I mean, there's different words for it, but it's basically where are we going in the short term and where are we going in the long term. So I'm gonna turn now to some principles of best practice for you, and we're gonna talk a little bit about several of them. The first one is really simple, and this is you don't represent a constituency. You separate the interests of the school and from a particular constituency or a child. How many of you, just out of curiosity, are parent trustees? That you also have a child at the school? Okay, Andrew, you do. Andrew, you do.
Yeah.
And
that's common at our school on the board. Largest majority are parents.
Okay, great.
Our
So
board is all parents.
say that again, please.
Our board is all parents.
Okay, so in a board that's all parents, this gets a little tricky in that you have to make sure that which hat are you wearing? When you're in a board meeting, the hat you're wearing is very simple. It's the board hat. It is the trustee hat. It's the needs of the institution. You have to separate those things. I have been a parent trustee. It is unbelievably difficult sometimes, but it is very important that you make this distinction here. The other one is that you need to accept and support board decisions. Does this mean that the board is monolithic in its thinking? What does this mean when we have this statement right here?
Hey, Mark, real quick. I see Crystal has her hand up. Do you have a question, Crystal?
Yeah, Crystal, hop in.
Oh, no, I don't have a question. I was raising my hand to having a child at the school.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks. What about on this one? A trustee accepts and supports board decisions. What does that mean?
That means after discussion and debate, when there's a path that's been chosen, it would be a best practice to have the board have one voice and not be a dissenter on the side, at least publicly.
So, and I think you've said it very nicely. And, the board is not monolithic. The board should have healthy discussions, debates. You should see it. You've all been brought onto the board because you have a certain talent, expertise, that you should bring that to the decision making. It should be part of the whole conversation, the whole vetting. But once that is done, then the decision's made and everybody should be on board. You should not become involved in specific management, personnel, or curricular issues. And again, we talked about confidentiality. We already did that one. You should assess your effectiveness as a governing body. I mentioned that earlier. And again, you show the support of the head and the school within the community. This is kind of an interesting notion. And so those of you who are parent trustees, you'll understand this a lot, in that authority rests with the entire board, not individual board members. I can tell you as a board member who's had children at my school, it's very important that you help the staff become comfortable. That when they get a trustee's child in their classroom, say the teachers, they might say, oh my gosh, I've got a trustee's child, and they're gonna look at you or think about you a little differently. It's very important that you put them at ease. That you say, I'm only so-and-so's parent. I am not coming in as a trustee. This is not a trustee thing. This is my parent. Because you have the right as a parent, you still are a parent. So, but it's very important that you help put everybody at ease with this. You probably are going to have conversations at birthday parties or events that'll be a little different, where other parents might say, oh, I think you should do this as a trustee. You need to refer them back to the head of school here so that they understand you're just in that birthday party or whatever it is as a parent, not as a trustee. And then you actively participate in the development efforts of the school. That's really important as trustees. So what do we look at when we look at what we would call an effective board? It's really pretty simple. First of all, the good news is you only have one employee. That's all you have to worry about. Some of you run organizations where you have many employees. You don't have to deal with that at a school. You have one. Your one employee has responsibility for implementing your board policies. That's what he or she does. This one employee has complete authority over the faculty and staff selection, staff evaluation, staff dismissal. But the key here is this next one, which is the one employee is responsible for keeping you informed about decisions. And so the way I kind of shorthand this is that there should be no surprises. There should be no surprises from the board to you, from the board to the head, from the head to the board. So it's real important that there's really good communication between the board and the head of school. And then your one employee is responsible for working with the board in developing and monitoring the school's resources. And the school's resources fall into two categories. One would be the fiscal side and the physical side, the capital side, the physical plant, and then all the funds of the school. But the second one is the personnel resources. So that's really important that your one employee does those things. These are what we would, when we see these things happening, we would say there's an effective governance structure in place at the school. So as a trustee, everything should start with the mission of your school. So I've just said that to you, but why is that the case? Why is it important for you to know your school's mission as a trustee? Help me with that. Why is it important?
The policies align with that mission.
Okay, so Buxton, so the policies need to align with the mission. Okay, what else?
Well, I think that as you're trying to make decisions or have conversations about specific questions, that you want there to be fidelity to, again, this idea of continuity. And
sure.
Sort of consistency with, other precedents.
So you want to make sure that what you're doing is in alignment. So as you're making decisions on a regular basis, that you are aligning those decisions with the mission of the school. So I'm going to say, well, so the question might be, what do we focus in on? And so let me give you a few things that you should be focusing in on. This is where it keeps locking up on me. I really apologize for this. But we'll get this going here for you. Can you see this?
It's not sharing yet, Mark.
Not yet.
Okay, let me switch to share and hopefully we'll get this. So we're going to talk about three areas that you should focus in on. One is what we would call the fiduciary mode. One is the generative mode, and one is the strategic mode. Fiduciary is pretty simple. This is kind of the bedrock of governance. This is where you're faithful to the mission. You're accountable for performance. You comply with all laws. That's the basic. If you do nothing more, you should do this one. But I believe that the value and the excitement of being a trustee is in the last two. The first one is the generative mode, and this is where you work in a partnership with the administration to make sense of ambiguous situations. You're going to get lots of decisions. You're going to have lots of incomplete data. You're going to try to make decisions. You need to bring your talents, your skills to the meetings and help everybody make sense of what are we seeing, what does this mean as far as the trend. And once you've done that, then you want to go to the next mode, which is the strategic mode. And that's really where now you are going to plot your course. You're going to plan it out. How do we get there? We've made sense of everything. How do we go from point A to point B? So I want to just quickly turn to assessing the board and assessing the school. This is one that I think sometimes gets a little bit put onto the back burners. But as trustees, you should assess your effectiveness as the board, as a board member. And how do you assess the school? So as board members, you want to look at what we would call the self-assessment. And you should be looking at two things. One is how do we work as a board? And then the other one is how do I work as an individual board member? And once you've done that, you want to go ahead and I suggest that you assign this to a committee, or some schools you like to use a consultant as you're doing your board assessment. You should be identifying as a board, what are we doing well as a board? And I suggest that you do that in writing. What are our strengths as a board? You should prioritize these. What are the best things we do and working down? Then you should identify what are the growth areas. And you will have some. There's no board that's perfect. So you should identify those. You should prioritize your growth areas. And you should determine which committees are needing to happen. Is it a standing committee? Is it an ad hoc committee? And you should develop an implementation timeline for this. And I suggest that you spend about 15 to 20 minutes at every board meeting. So I've covered a lot in the last 40 minutes of this conversation. I've actually covered what I normally take about 50 minutes to do. So we do have a little bit of time tonight to just talk a little bit about any of these areas and any areas of comments, questions that you have about anything we've covered so far. Comments, questions?
Mark,
Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
just a question though, that last bullet point about committees spending 20 minutes to give a progress report, do you mean one committee per meeting, or that all committees would do that?
One. So I mean, if you have a committee that's looking at overall effectiveness of the board, and maybe 20 minutes is too long, but maybe there's 5 or 10 minutes. The point is to have it on the agenda, that you have some group that's responsible for looking at the whole board, looking at our effectiveness. Sometimes it's the governance committee, but it should be some group that's tasked with how do we improve our board. That the idea should be continuous improvement of the board.
So it's showing how the assessment tool is enhancing the board's work.
Yeah. So let's say the out of the assessment of the board that you did amongst yourselves, that it came out that we need to do a better job preparing communication amongst ourselves. So you might then say, well, how are we going to do that? And every meeting there should be a little bit of discussion about that. And maybe another one was we need to have better committee meetings. Well, how would we do that? And you should have conversations about that. The point here is that typically on boards, this one gets pushed to the back because there's so many other things that can jump up in front of you that you don't do it. And so we strongly encourage you to put that on the agenda, have it as something as a self improvement of the board itself. Great question, Nancy. Great.
That's good. That's clear and very helpful.
What are, I mean, we talked a lot about best practices and ways to approach duties, and what are pitfalls? What have you seen that, you know, if you're observing it, you know, sets off alarm bells? What are some common pitfalls?
So probably the most common pitfall is where the board moves into operations, where the board begins to want to deal with operations. They want to talk about the performance of the third grade math teacher. And that works its way into a board meeting. And that is really where I've seen boards can run amok a bit, because that's really the responsibility of the administration to deal with that. So that's one area where there's a movement from policy into operations. So I try to make it simple but there's not really a bright yellow line here. I mean, sometimes there are some areas where policy and operations are kind of running a little parallel with each other, but that's where it becomes the conversation becomes clear. What's the administrative side of this? How does the administration take care of this? What does the board do? So keeping those roles as clear as possible for the board itself, as well as for the larger constituents, the parents at the school, the alumni at the school, the faculty and staff at the school. So everybody knows. That's probably the biggest one that I know of. There's others. George, Judy, do you want to hop in on this at all? The other ones that you might have seen?
One of the things that came to mind as you were saying that is that it's often important for current trustees to think about their responsibility to children of their grandchildren's generation. You know, that's your job. You may not have grandchildren yet, your own children are in the school, but thinking about, we don't need to focus on my own kids' experience. We should be focused on creating an environment for my grandkids' experience. And the administration is responsible for making sure my own kids' experience is optimal. One of the things that we often see in accreditation along those lines would be, or I guess somewhat differently, is thinking about the strategic financial health of the school. that not just what the next budget involves and what assumptions go into making the next budget, but thinking 5 years out, thinking 3 years out, 5 years out, that these are very important elements of a sustainable environment. And as a fiduciary of the school, the trustees are very responsible and should be very focused on where the school is heading financially and what the financial forecasting the finance committee and the board can do to really think about what the trends are, so that you're not just thinking about the isolated incidents, but trying to identify whether something's part of a trend, and that's a pattern that should be watched.
Yeah, and let me build on that, because I think that's a really important concept, which is the only, and I said this at the very beginning, the only group that is responsible really formally for the long-term viability of the school are the trustees. It's not really the responsibility of the current staff. They have a responsibility to shepherd the resources with you, but you have the responsibility for the long term. So you're the ones that are thinking about 10 years out, 20 years out. So if you build a building, that's a 50-year concept perhaps. If you are looking at your budgets, are the trends good? And George mentioned the idea of a trend versus a blip. That's important, that you start looking at trend analysis, and so you understand where the school is heading. Often when we look at schools that have had difficulty financially, the signs were there 10 years before, and they were sort of gradually there, and nobody kind of said, well, wait, time out. Let's really look at the trends that are happening here. And usually it's around tuition and enrollment. Those are the two big areas. Yeah.
No, finish. I thought you were done.
No, it's good. Go ahead.
In terms of the question of pitfalls, for boards that have, and most day schools have a good population of parents on the board, one of the pitfalls is that you have friendships and you know a lot of fellow parents, and it's easy for them to draw you into disciplinary questions. So a friend or the child of a friend or the friend of a friend has been disciplined in ways that a parent who you know thinks is unfair. And it's very easy to be sympathetic because, you know, you love your own kids and you're sympathetic to other people who feel similarly. But and I think that is one of the main pitfalls that I've observed in schools, watching some trustees get drawn into issues that are difficult issues for the school administration and have to do with discipline and weighing in ways that make a decision more complicated for the administration.
What about everybody else in the group here? Other things to answer to go to his question? Other things that you've seen as trustees if you've been in meetings for a little while? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
I was just thinking that it's just very easy for us to get sucked into the weeds and be anecdotal, depending on how much experience the trustees have. So I was, I just wanted to stress how important it is when you're talking about having generative discussions, and that sometimes it's helpful, I think, if those are framed looking at the trends, like what are the, that you could anticipate ambiguous situations.
Yes.
When your strategic plan is already in place, it isn't just we go from fiduciary to generative to strategic, but back and forth, and sort of training the mind, the group as a whole, to be looking in broader, longer terms, because I think it just can make meetings so difficult. And then once you're in the weeds, you do get tempted to go, as others have pointed out, into the operational, sympathetic side of your, humanity, and take off the trustee hat. So that's a pitfall I see, just in terms of the chair's management of that, or even structuring the board meeting to have a generative discussion of some level. I mean, I don't know, but the best boards I've been on have managed to include that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually seen in some really great boards where that's actually part of the agenda.
Yeah.
Generative conversation around something.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very valuable to the board members themselves. I think it gives you purpose as a board member, and it you know, we're all donating our times. So it's important that we feel like, okay, I'm using myself in a way that's really valuable to the school. And that generative conversation is really, really important. The trend analysis that Maureen's talking about is critical, that you are paying attention to the various trends. We didn't talk tonight about dashboards, but you know, what are the dashboards that your school is looking at? You should be paying attention to enrollment trends. You should be paying attention to tuition trends. You should be paying attention to salary trends. You should be paying attention to student attrition trends. Those are faculty attrition trends. Those are really important because you're making decisions. Sometimes you're making a decision. So for instance, on student attrition trends, you might say, wow, if the tuition goes up by 4%, we're going to maybe lose families. Well, did you? What happened? What was really the outcome? Or if we don't provide a certain X increase to certain group of employees, we're going to lose a lot of people. Well, is that the case? What does the history show of that? Because there's times you're going to have to make informed decisions based on what does the trend say. And so I think it's really important to have the data sitting there in front of you and you're constantly analyzing and reevaluating and thinking about it. That's really the heavy lifting of a board.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a few minutes left, maybe 4 or 5 minutes left to just talk about any questions, comments about being a board member, things we haven't covered tonight that you would like to talk about.
I think one of the things that strikes me as being important is the role of committees. We can't know everything about everything that's going on in the school. And I think there's a real reliance on the different committees on the board. And I think, you know, the work that they put into key strategic, you know, mission items, you know, for the school.
And I think that's a really powerful point, Buxton, is that when a board has a really good committee structure and the committees are really doing their work, that's terrific because you're right. You don't, particularly a large board, you do not want to do a committee of the whole, every single decision. That's just not feasible and you'll get mired down. So you have to rely on the committees. And when the committee comes back to present what they've worked on, then where your talent comes in is then asking the smart questions of the committee. What about this? What about that? What about this? And they may say, oops, oh boy, we missed those 4 things. We're going to take it back to the committee and we're going to look at this a little bit more and we'll come back to you again. The one advice I would give you on board work also is try not to force decisions. You know, try to, you know, particularly big decisions that, you know, let them percolate a bit, let them go out and look at them and then come back and talk about it again, vet it further, talk about it again. I mean, it's really important that you don't try to just jam decisions down. That nobody feels comfortable with that, and it's really not a good decision-making process. So good committees, good people on the committees, when the committee presents the whole board, making sure that you do ask questions about the committee. And this is really true, by the way, of the finance committee. There's sometimes a tendency, if you're not a finance person, to say, well, they're taking care of this. You should be asking questions about the audit. You should be asking questions about the 990. You should be asking questions about the assumptions in the budgets to actuals. You should ask questions about the long-term plan. Did we reassess? So we projected 300 students and we had, you know, 305. Well, that's good. Is that a trend or is that a blip? We projected 300 students. We had 290. Is that a trend or is that a blip? And that should constantly be getting reassessed every single year.
Another thing I think along committee lines is making sure there are minutes and making sure that all trustees are reading them. I mean, I think a trustee responsibility is definitely to read all the materials that the head of school puts out, that committees put out, because we can't know everything, but we need to be well informed to make decisions. So, and also looking at all the, I don't know, the weekly blurbs, the Facebook post, anything that's coming out from the school, so you really can see how the school is presenting itself and make sure you agree as well as are well informed.
Great point, Nancy. Really good point.
Draw you into disciplinary questions. So a friend or the child of a friend or the friend of a friend has been disciplined in ways that a parent who you know thinks is unfair. And it's very easy to be sympathetic because, you know, you love your own kids and you're sympathetic to other people who feel similarly. But and I think that is one of the main pitfalls that I've observed in schools, watching some trustees get drawn into issues that are difficult issues for the school administration and have to do with discipline and weighing in ways that make a decision more complicated for the administration.
What about everybody else in the group here? Other things to answer to go to his question? Other things that you've seen as trustees if you've been in meetings for a little while? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
I was just thinking that it's just very easy for us to get sucked into the weeds and be anecdotal, depending on how much experience the trustees have. So I was, I just wanted to stress how important it is when you're talking about having generative discussions, and that sometimes it's helpful, I think, if those are framed looking at the trends, like what are the, that you could anticipate ambiguous situations.
Yes.
When your strategic plan is already in place. It isn't just we go from fiduciary to generative to strategic, but back and forth, and sort of training the mind, the group as a whole, to be looking in broader, longer terms, because I think it just can make meetings so difficult. And then once you're in the weeds, you do get tempted to go, as others have pointed out, into the operational, sympathetic side of your, humanity, and take off the trustee hat. So that's a pitfall I see, just in terms of the chair's management of that, or even structuring the board meeting to have a generative discussion of some level. I mean, I don't know, but the best boards I've been on have managed to include that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually seen in some really great boards where that's actually part of the agenda.
Yeah.
Generative conversation around something.
Yeah.
And I think that's very valuable to the board members themselves. I think it gives you purpose as a board member, and we're all donating our times. So it's important that we feel like, okay, I'm using myself in a way that's really valuable to the school. And that generative conversation is really, really important. The trend analysis that Maureen's talking about is critical, that you are paying attention to the various trends. We didn't talk tonight about dashboards, but what are the dashboards that your school is looking at? You should be paying attention to enrollment trends. You should be paying attention to tuition trends. You should be paying attention to salary trends. You should be paying attention to student attrition trends. Those are faculty attrition trends. Those are really important because you're making decisions. Sometimes you're making a decision. So for instance, on student attrition trends, you might say, wow, if the tuition goes up by 4%, we're going to maybe lose families. Well, did you? What happened? What was really the outcome? Or if we don't provide a certain X increase to certain group of employees, we're going to lose a lot of people. Well, is that the case? What does the history show of that? Because there's times you're going to have to make informed decisions based on what does the trend say. And so I think it's really important to have the data sitting there in front of you and you're constantly analyzing and reevaluating and thinking about it. That's really the heavy lifting of a board.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a few minutes left, maybe 4 or 5 minutes left to just talk about any questions, comments about being a board member, things we haven't covered tonight that you would like to talk about.
I think one of the things that strikes me as being important is the role of committees. We can't know everything about everything that's going on in the school. And I think there's a real reliance on the different committees on the board. And I think, you know, the work that they put into key strategic, you know, mission items, you know, for the school.
And I think that's a really powerful point, Buxton, is that when a board has a really good committee structure and the committees are really doing their work, that's terrific, because you're right. You don't, particularly a large board, you do not want to do a committee of the whole, every single decision. That's just not feasible, and you'll get mired down. So you have to rely on the committees. And when the committee comes back to present what they've worked on, then where your talent comes in is then asking the smart questions of the committee. What about this? What about that? What about this? And they may say, oops, oh boy, we missed those 4 things. We're going to take it back to the committee and we're going to look at this a little bit more, and we'll come back to you again. The one advice I would give you on board work also is try not to force decisions. You know, try to, you know, particularly big decisions that, you know, let them percolate a bit, let them go out and look at them, and then come back and talk about it again, vet it further, talk about it again. I mean, it's really important that you don't try to just jam decisions down, that nobody feels comfortable with that, and it's really not a good decision-making process. So good committees, good people on the committees, when the committee presents the whole board, making sure that you do ask questions about the committee. And this is really true, by the way, of the finance committee. There's sometimes a tendency, if you're not a finance person, to say, well, they're taking care of this. You should be asking questions about the audit. You should be asking questions about the 990. You should be asking questions about the assumptions in the budgets to actuals. You should ask questions about the long-term plan. Did we reassess? So we projected 300 students and we had, you know, 305. Well, that's good. Is that a trend or is that a blip? We projected 300 students, we had 290. Is that a trend or is that a blip? And that should constantly be getting reassessed every single year.
Another thing I think along committee lines is making sure there are minutes and making sure that all trustees are reading them. I mean, I think a trustee responsibility is definitely to read all the materials that the head of school puts out, that committees put out, because we can't know everything, but we need to be well informed to make decisions. So, and also looking at all the, I don't know, the weekly blurbs, the Facebook post, anything that's coming out from the school, so you really can see how the school is presenting itself and make sure you agree as well as are well informed.
Great point, Nancy. Really good point.